Hello, this is Levi Wampler with MMA Striking Coach Association. Today we're interviewing Matt Thornton. He studied Jeet Kune Do since 1988, developed the functional Jeet Kune Do video series, which was voted top 5 self-defense videos of all time by Black Belt Magazine, and he's the president of the Straight Blast Gym International. How are you doing today, Matt?
Good, how are you?
Doing pretty good today. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got started in martial arts?
Sure. My parents put me in a Kempo karate class when I was about 8, I think, probably, because I was watching Star Trek and I wanted to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I only did that for a couple of years, and then eventually, as I became a teenager, I started to get into boxing, and I boxed through my time in the military, and then when I got out of the military and came back to the States, I kept up with my boxing, and that's also initially what attracted me to the JKD material, because when I saw their videos or structural material, they always seemed to be using boxing hands, which at the time was fairly rare. So that was my hook to get into the JKD world.
Mm-hmm. What would you think is the best way to, say, prepare a stand-up fighter to face a grappler in a ring or in the match, in the octagon?
The best way for a stand-up fighter to face a grappler in the ring, our whole curriculum at SBG, everything we build on, everything we do, and everything I'm always preaching to people is fundamentals. And that's the same whether we're dealing with the ground fighting part of what we do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or we're dealing with stand-up. So what we try and do with our stand-up is really boil it down to the core fundamentals. And just like on the ground, the core fundamentals for fighting on the ground are your posture and your timing with that posture as it relates to the other person's position on the mat. And stand-up, that has to do with your distance, and that's all about footwork. So I think the number one most important skill for a stand-up fighter, period, but especially one that's going to be facing somebody who's going to be trying to clinch or shoot on him, is footwork and maintaining the proper distance, being able to get in and out. And then, of course, you have to combine that with sprawling and all your anti-clinch work that we have as part of the curriculum. But if I was going to just pick one thing to tell you, I would just say be focusing on footwork and distance, and that makes all the difference in the world.
That sounds great. Let's see. Now, do you have any favorite stand-up fighting drills you could share with us? Maybe about, like you said, your anti-clinch work?
Sure. I mean, getting back to what we're talking about as far as fundamentals, one of the drills that we work on in almost every class is what we just call the ear drill. And all that is two fighters will square off with each other. They're far apart. We usually start all of our combinations and all of our movement farther apart than you might think, because when you get into the MMA cage, the distance between two fighters is even a little farther back than you'd even see in a kickboxing match, let alone a Muay Thai matches, because of the clinch. So we start farther out, and then one fighter is just constantly trying to look in. Say they're facing somebody in an orthodox stance that's got a left leg forward. They're always trying to look in that person's left ear. So wherever that person goes, they're always moving to the right, away from the power hand, and looking in that ear, and just try to maintain that angle the entire time. So that's a simple drill people can work on right away. You can put contact in with it or not, but that's something we want to practice every time we work out.
That's pretty easy to drill to implement.
Sure.
Could you tell us about how far you think that distance actually is for somebody that's never been in the ring? You say it's a little bit farther away than you would expect.
How far? I'm sorry. How far? What is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, when you go into an MMA ring, you mentioned the distance is farther. Like people. When you go in for the first time.
If you can kick somebody if you can throw a tie kick, if you can throw a right leg roundhouse kick and hit somebody, you're too close. In fact, if you can reach out without stepping with the teeth, you're probably too close. And I'm not saying you're not going to get into that distance and throw a combination, because you are, but maintaining that distance throughout the fight, what's going to happen if you're with a grappler or you're with a wrestler? What's going to happen is you're going to be in the clinch constantly. And if you're with another striker, what's going to happen is it's going to turn into a brawl. Now, the crowd loves that, and fans like that, and promoters like that. But as a coach, even when I have athletes that are focused primarily on stand-up fighting, I don't like that, because no matter how good of a stand-up fighter you are, if you want to get in there and exchange, then there's always that roll of the dice that you're going to be the one that catches the punch. So what we want our athletes to do is go in and out, get into that range, throw their combination, and then get out. And the out range, the range for where you would start your action, should be far enough away that neither person can reach each other at that moment.
Okay. And now, as a coach, what would you say are some of the common mistakes you see new people when they come into the gym for either starting their training or maybe preparing for a fight?
Well, for starting training, I think the biggest mistake is, all across the world now, I think, everybody and their uncle's putting up MMA sign outside the door. So taekwondo schools and karate schools all of a sudden, because of the popularity now, have started teaching mixed martial arts. And so the big mistakes for beginners is you're going to go to a place where the people don't really know mixed martial arts. And then the second mistake is, even if you do wind up going to an MMA gym, a gym where they do actually have competitors that they put into whatever the local venues are on a regular basis, a lot of times it's very rough, and there's a heavy amount of contact. They get into sparring almost immediately, and they also start to put everything together right away. So within a very short period of time, and I'm not talking about somebody that's already a collegiate level wrestler or, purple belt in jiu-jitsu or something like that, but just somebody brand new off the street. If you take somebody brand new and in a very short period of time you have them sparring in MMA with all the tools put together, what happens is they develop bad habits. I mean, they're going to have bad habits on the ground. They're going to have bad habits in the clinch. They're going to have bad habits when they're doing their striking. And they might be tough, and if they can take a punch, they'll get in there and they'll get a record of 2-4 or 3-6 or whatever it is, depending on what the level of competition is locally. But they will never be able to reach the upper levels of professional fights because they haven't established that foundation. And so I think the important part is to really develop solid skill as a boxer or a kickboxer, really develop solid skill on the ground, really develop solid wrestling, and then you start to put it together. And that takes, on average, several years. So if somebody has no training, for them to think that they should be able, if they can walk into your gym with no training and you will put them in a cage in anything less than, say, 2 years, you probably don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're probably causing that athlete more harm than good. So that's my opinion. For us, we don't allow anybody to compete that's not at least a blue belt in jiu-jitsu and hasn't been on a comp team for usually about a year of training, and our comp team is very hard in terms of the level of conditioning that's required. So I don't think I've ever had anybody that's trained at my gym for less than 3 years before I've allowed them to fight, and they can't fight unless we give them the go-ahead. And if they want to fight right away and they come and say, oh, no, I just want to fight next week, or they book their own, that's cool. There's 16 gyms in my area that will just put you in the cage right away and don't really give a shit. Go train with them. If you want to train with us, you have to be a certain quality. So that's number one. Number two, even at the pro levels with guys that are very good already, I think a lot of them, especially as their event draws closer, are sparring, as in particular boxing, very hard, and I think you see a lot of knockouts in the UFC and in other venues that don't necessarily need to happen, because a lot of times those athletes, if you watch them in their training just a week or sometimes days before they got into that cage, they were boxing hard, and I just don't think that should ever happen. You need to really tailor off the level of contact, and by level of contact, I'm talking specifically about the blows you take to the head before you get to the event, because that stuff builds up, and people get concussions. And the evidence from medical associations and the scientific evidence as far as the danger of that is not really contestable. So I think people need to be really careful with how hard they box, especially as the event draws closer. So for our athletes, we always ease up on the contact the closer they get to their fight, so that their brain is in good shape when they step into that cage. Right.
So you just kind of periodize your training, make sure they take a long time with their fundamentals. They can actually, fight the way they're supposed to, and
right. And I don't think even when they're on their off-peak hours, or when they don't have a fight, a month away, even at that time, most of the time you don't need to go that hard. I mean, obviously, there has to be a time where people, really get to see what it's like when somebody's trying to knock them unconscious. But on a weekly basis, it's just not necessary. So I think a lot of the gyms they're still doing that way too hard. If you have a good coach, if you have good, responsible boxing trainers and Muay Thai coaches that know what they're doing, they should be able to put that athlete through a workout to develop skill, develop everything they need to fight at those levels without having to risk, brain injury.
Yeah. That's become very important, especially with the small gloves and the amount of, like you say, the amount of sparring some people go through before they even compete. It's been a real problem.
Yeah, it is.
Now, could you share with us maybe some of your favorite training materials or resources, any books, DVDs, workout equipment you think everybody should know about?
I hate to just plug my own material, but we have, not just myself, but the other coaches within Straight Blast Gym. And what we've tried to do is take, whether it's jiu-jitsu or stand-up or whatever we're doing, and just boil it down to its core essentials. So any of the products that people get through our organization, not necessarily me or things that I make money from, but the other coaches that are part of what we do. Mm-hmm. One thing I think you'll be guaranteed of when they see that is that every single thing on that DVD or every single thing in that article or blog post or whatever we put up, this is especially true of everything that I do, should be something that the athlete uses on a daily basis. If it's not something that you already know you need to do and you're doing all the time, and here's some tips about how to do that better, then it's probably not something we put out there. We try to avoid, the fancy jiu-jitsu movements that 1 out of every 100 people will be able to do. And stand-up is really no different. Like I said, when we're coaching stand-up, our emphasis is on distance, and that means footwork, just, really just having really good, solid fundamentals that the athlete can then build on before they start to get in there and just start banging on each other. So in our instructional materials, that's kind of our emphasis for that. As far as other people's stuff, I'm trying to think, because I honestly don't watch that many instructional videos. But, for jiu-jitsu, the only stuff I've really seen that I liked a lot was I like Solo's book, Jiu-Jitsu University, because that was all fundamentals. For stand-up, there's so much good stuff on the market. I mean, people can go to something simple like even the Ringside catalog, and they have some of the old boxing coaches out there. They have some really good DVDs. And even though you're, athletes who are training for MMA, or the coach is primarily an MMA coach, I think it's a mistake to assume that these old guys that have been in the boxing business for 40, 50 years don't have a lot to offer, because you can just take their material as far as how they're applying it with their boxers, and you can modify it just a little bit, and in it all, because again, it goes back to the fundamentals. It all translates directly to MMA. So I think that's an untapped resource by a lot of people. I think they should go back and, if they live in, even better if you're an MMA coach and you live in a decent-sized metropolitan area, go spend time at the boxing gym. Mm-hmm. Go hang out with some of the old boxing coaches that are there that have been, these old grizzled guys that have been coaching boxers for 40 years, and just listen to them when they corner their athletes, and listen to them when they're holding mitts, and just spend, the couple of years that I spent in the boxing gym around the coaches taught me more than anything I've ever learned from any MMA striking coach. Mm-hmm. Just watching how they dealt with athletes, watching strategy, what they'd tell them when they came back to the corner, and that kind of experience, I think, and for most people, it's probably going to be free. And most of these guys love to pass that information on, especially if they see that you're sincere. So that's what I would recommend for people, especially interested in striking.
Now, could you also share with us the best advice that your mentors ever gave you, about anything?
The thing that turned me around as far as everything related to martial arts, obviously the message that I put out and what I'm known for is aliveness, and that's about how you train as opposed to specifically what you train. And what I always try and remind people is, in fact, I just wrote a recent article, a letter to another author named Sam Harris, put up a post on self-defense, and I thought his article was fantastic. 99% of it was fantastic, and he's just telling people good common sense things to do in general. The very bottom part, he had a bit of a slippery slope there where I felt he was going to fall for that street versus what I consider to be a street versus sport fallacy, where you'll get people that are training in, really kind of 1- and 2-step sparring, training methods that resemble what you might see in traditional martial arts. But they rationalize it by saying, well, we're training for the street, and you MMA guys, or you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys, or you Muay Thai guy, whatever it is, you guys train for sport. And the problem there is that there is no special street escape from mount position. So if somebody gets in a fight in a parking lot and somebody's mounted on their chest and punched them, there's no special escape you teach for that person. It's the same ones we do in the MMA cage. It's the same ones you do on the mat in the gym. And you either have the skill to be able to pull that off or you don't. Just like there's no special knee and there's no special, punch to the face. And so you develop these things through athletic training. And if you take the aliveness out of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Muay Thai or anything else, then what you're going to be left with, no matter how functional those tools are, you won't be able to apply it. And so that's the message of aliveness that, that's what SBG is about, is promoting that. That came to me, I don't have a specific moment where it just all dawned on me, but the biggest influence in my life towards that was Hickman. it was meeting Hickson and training with Hickson, watching how he trained, watching how he drilled jiu-jitsu, and then just sitting down with him one time and him explaining to me that the most important thing in jiu-jitsu was timing. That everybody, by the time they get to a certain level, especially when you have somebody that has a game like he does, which is based all on fundamentals, somebody that's a purple belt or a brown belt knows the same movements that he does, but his timing is so much better. Well, how do you get that timing? You only get that timing by working against resistant people. And that bit of advice is the thing that catapulted me into the idea of aliveness and put the gym where it was, because we were the first ones kind of in Oregon to start training that way. This was before the advent of the UFC. So I think if I was going to pick one thing that was the biggest influence on me, it would have been Hickson, and it would have been that particular little bit of information.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing with us today.
You're welcome. This
has been Levi Wunkler with MMAStrikingCoach.com. We've been interviewing Matt Thornton of StraightBlastGym.com. If you want to find out any more information from him, his website's out there. It is StraightBlastGym.com, right?
Yep.
Okay, I think I've said it twice, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you got it right.
All right, well, thank you for speaking to us.
Thanks, Levi.